Nose Hill.
A Liberal member of Parliament recently tweeted that provincial governments would be criminally negligent if they considered easing COVID restrictions. But the reality is that we're 3 months behind the rest of the developed world in getting vaccines. The public is tiring of restrictions and compliance may become an issue. We know COVID restrictions have caused increased domestic violence, a mental health crisis, and countless business closures, and they can't continue indefinitely. We need hope, leadership, and a plan for safe reopening. How many Canadians must be vaccinated before the federal government starts recommending lifting restrictions?
Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And I would agree with her that public health measures, including restrictions, have been difficult for all Canadians. I'll start there, thanking Canadians for their enormous contributions to the safety and health of their friends, their family, and their community. Mr. Speaker, we are on a good path with vaccination, and as the member knows, we are set to receive well over 600,000 vaccines this week, 400,000 the week after. We know that the end is in sight, Mr. Speaker, but Canadians must continue to protect each other. We'll be there for Canadians and for provinces and territories during these next difficult weeks.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
That word salad will not restore lost jobs, and it will not reunite families. Enough. The United Kingdom is delivering a plan to reopen their economy as we speak. Not everyone will agree with every element, but they're doing what leaders should be doing, making choices, explaining them, and providing a clear, certain, safe path forward. We've not seen this type of political courage from the Liberals. Why?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the member opposite knows that decisions around which public measures are applied and when lies with the provinces and territories, and we have been there every step of the way to support them in these very difficult decisions, whether they're financial measures to support individuals, businesses, indeed the provinces and territories themselves. We've been there and will continue to be there, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to her ideas about how to move forward together with provinces and territories and Canadians instead of constant questions. Perhaps there's some solutions.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Yeah, a national rapid testing program, clear timelines on vaccine delivery, understanding how many vaccinated people need to be in place before restrictions are lifting, clear data that is being used to make decisions, choices around how we're moving forward. These are things that the health minister should be doing, not just blaming the provincial government and saying that it's not her job. We need hope. We need a clear plan that allows people to make plans for their futures. And we need strategies that I just mentioned. How many Canadians must be vaccinated before the federal government starts recommending lifting restrictions?
Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that's exactly what we have been doing. We've been supporting provinces and territories. In fact, the member mentioned rapid testing, millions upon millions of rapid tests to provinces and territories. And even after that, guidance and support and training and working with the private sector to make sure that no matter where and when Canadians have access to testing, that will help them understand their status. Mr. Speaker, billions of dollars to support individuals and businesses and indeed provinces and territories to take those difficult steps, whether it's to impose restrictions or lift restrictions. Mr. Speaker, we've been there, we'll continue to be there, and we will get through this together.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Last week, we learned that President Biden will be contributing $4 billion to COVAX. Meanwhile, Canada is the only G7 country that has accessed vaccines through the COVAX program, a program intended to prevent more people from dying in low and middle income countries and to prevent dangerous variants from developing and affecting everyone, including Canadians. This is an international embarrassment. Can the minister admit that the Liberals are accessing COVAX because of their failures to invest in domestic pharmaceutical research, development, and manufacturing capacity?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we very much welcome the United States contribution. In fact, Canada was the leading donor. We were the first to donate to COVAX, and we welcome countries all around the world making these contributions. And I would just correct my honourable colleague in that COVAX was intentionally set up to have wealthy countries contribute to COVAX, both to procure vaccines so that it could grow purchasing power, so that it could both subsidize vaccines for low-income countries while working for equitable access. Canada was the second largest contributor to the COVAX AMC, and we are very proud that we have helped set up this historic global mechanism.
When the Prime Minister thought, who should I buy them from? He looked around the world and he said, I know, the country that's holding our people hostage. You can imagine the PRC Politburo filled with bureaucrats rolling around on the ground in gut-splitting laughter at this Prime Minister's naivete. Madam Speaker, simple question. When he wasted 100 days in the PRC, what the hell was he thinking?
To be vaccinated prior to the end of September.
I mean, it's just $250 million. I mean, what's that between friends, right? Anyone? Any data? No?
Thank you, Ms. Rempel
In
Garner.
months, we're not going to have a lot of people vaccinated. That's a fact. Who said that, Mr. Speaker? Dr. Tam said it last Friday. That's because even if the Prime Minister's projections for April are reached, we'll only have 8% of Canadians vaccinated. Public health officers across the country are warning about a third wave, and new variants pose a new threat. Why has the Prime Minister's massive vaccine failure left Canadians so vulnerable to continued lockdowns and a third wave of COVID-19?
The Honourable Minister.
Canadians who wish to be vaccinated prior to the end of September. Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the question. In fact, our vaccine procurement strategy is on track for the delivery of 6 million vaccines prior to the end of March, a cumulative total of 29 million prior to the end of June, and 84 million vaccines prior to the end of September of approved suppliers alone. We may have additional vaccines coming online, Mr. Speaker, and all Canadians who wish to be vaccinated prior to the end of September will have access to a vaccine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're receiving 82,000 fewer doses of Moderna than we expected to get this week. That is not a victory. That's 41,000 more Canadians who will be stuck waiting for a vaccine because of the Prime Minister's failure to make smart decisions early on when it came to the vaccine. They need to vaccinate 300,000 Canadians a day in order to meet this September deadline. Now, as we speak, the U.S. is vaccinating 1.7 million people per day, so we know it can be done. So where's their plan that doesn't change by the moment that will get 300,000 Canadians vaccinated each and every day?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this plan does not change by the moment. This plan has been in place for many months. And Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to announce to this House of Commons today that we will be receiving 500,000 plus vaccines in this country just this week alone, Mr. Speaker. We are on a very steep ramp up towards millions and millions of vaccines coming into this country, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that all Canadians, including all members of this House, will work together to make sure that we're executing a Team Canada approach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we really hope that that happens because as of this morning, Canada is 59th in the world in vaccine administration per capita. The United States has inoculated 63 million people, the UK 18 million, and Israel has 83% of their population vaccinated. While this government has a measly target that's only going to see 8% of Canadians vaccinated by April. If 8% and 59th isn't good enough for the Israelis, the Brits, or the Americans, why in the world does this Prime Minister think that it's good enough for Canadians?
Honourable Minister.
Canadians who wish to be vaccinated. I do appreciate the question coming from the honourable member. And I will mention again, Mr. Speaker, that we have a plan and we are executing that plan. 6 million prior to the end of March, 29 million prior to the end of June, and 84 million vaccines of approved suppliers alone prior to the end of September. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, additional vaccines, AstraZeneca, J&J, Novavax, may come online during this time with approval from Health Canada, and that will mean additional vaccines into this country. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Louis.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, since 2014, the Uyghur Muslim minority in northwest China has been experiencing unspeakable torment. 2 million people have disappeared. Women have been raped and sterilized. A score of religious sites have been destroyed. For me, it's clear this is a genocide. In less than an hour, there will be a vote in this House on the question. Will this Prime Minister show the courage to act as a leader, take a position, and vote on this issue? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we have said on multiple occasions, we are seriously concerned about the allegations and reports about the treatment of Uyghur Muslims and other minorities, other Turkic Muslim minorities in the Xinjiang region. We have clearly stated this to the government of China. And we have requested access to the region so that experts can investigate the situation. We take genocide allegations very seriously, and we are working closely with our international partners on this extremely important issue. The Honourable
Missing in action again.
The Honourable Member.
Monsieur le Président, sur cet enjeu très crucial, on a...
Mr. Speaker, on this critical issue, we can't speak only about allegations. We need to take a clear stand. The U.S. has done so. Two key figures in the Biden administration have already spoken about a genocide. Once again, Mr. Speaker, in less than an hour there will be a vote on this. Will our Prime Minister, who is supposed to represent all Canadians, take a stand and denounce this genocide? The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is essentially the same question once again. We have clearly stated to the government of China what our position is on these reports and allegations, which are highly concerning. Regarding the treatment of Uyghur Muslims and other minorities in the Xinjiang region, we have also brought in measures regarding products produced in the labor camps. The Government of Canada takes these allegations very seriously, and we will continue to work with our international partners on this file. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we all know that the best way to avoid having issues when you get back from a trip is to simply not travel. But this government's hotel quarantines program sets a new standard for incompetence. It's basically like they reinvented the Phoenix system, Mr. Speaker. People call the government's hotline and are told they'll have to wait 3 hours. They wait, and after 3 hours, the line is dropped. Some people have had to wait up to 25 hours to reserve a room. We're talking about a hotline, Mr. Speaker. What is the government doing here? The Honourable Minister.
Every step of the way, we have protected Canadians from the importation of COVID-19 at the borders. Adding the additional layer of testing at the borders with the quarantine while we receive the results of those tests is an additional step to understand the role of variants of concern and how the virus is shifting and changing and how it will impact our success. I want to thank Canadians for their continued hard work and remind Canadians that now is not the time to travel internationally.
James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, a damning media investigation has revealed that this government consistently green lights water projects on First Nation reserves to companies with bad track records, and that the minister's insistence on the lowest bid has resulted in cost overruns, corners being cut, and the ongoing denial of safe service. And yet the minister continues to stick to his 3-point plan, which is, number 1, show concern, number 2, act surprised, and number 3, do nothing. Why is he continuing to perpetuate this policy of incompetence, negligence, and the basic denial of human rights to First Nation people across this country?
Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member will well note, at the end of November and the beginning of December, this government invested $1.5 billion to further invest in water infrastructure with First Nations and in partnership with First Nations. The member is fundamentally mistaken with the process, about the process with which he engaged with First Nations. They pick the contractors, we work with them, and we follow industry practice to ensure that these projects will move forward, and that ultimately long-term water advisories get lifted. This is a choice of the First Nation, and we will continue to walk that path with them as we ensure that the long-term asset, the water infrastructure, is preserved in partnership with First Nations.
The honourable member for Carleton.
To be the worst at one thing is a real distinction. To be the worst at everything takes real talent and effort. Unemployment in Canada, with 800,000 people losing their jobs, is the highest in the G7, the worst. Our vaccine results here in Canada are the worst in the G7. And they paid for all that failure with the biggest deficit, the worst fiscal record in the G7. Can the Prime Minister explain to us how he's managed to deliver the worst results at the highest price?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, to the contrary, I will point out that Canada has had fewer people die than many of the comparator countries that the honourable member points to. Moreover, he's using mistaken statistics in order to try to trick Canadians into supporting them. If you actually want to compare the employment record of Canada against the U.S., 71% of the jobs lost during the pandemic in Canada have returned to 56% in the U.S. We have a higher labour force participation rate than our G7 counterparts. Mr. Speaker, we have had one of the most ambitious economic recovery strategies and pandemic response strategies, and if the honourable member wants to continue to try to trick Canadians into supporting them, I invite him to remain on the opposition side of the aisle after the next election.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, let me quote what the BMO says about Canada's U.S. comparison. The unemployment rate in Canada was 3.1 percentage points higher than the U.S. in January. This compares with a 2% spread over the last 5 years. We estimate that Canadian unemployment could be roughly 300,000 jobs below where it would otherwise be if GDP was keeping pace with the U.S. economy. So stop torturing the data to make it to confess to anything and tell the truth. Doesn't Canada have the highest unemployment in the G7 today? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've watched the honourable member try to use the same statistics to trick Canadians for the last number of weeks. The unemployment data kept in Canada measures something different than the federal Labour of Statistics in the United States. If you want to compare apples to apples, I would point him to the labour force participation. In Canada, it is 64.3%, Japan 62%, the US 61.3%, and Germany 56.1%. If he's wondering how our pandemic response is assisted in this, I point him to the fact that 71% of the jobs lost during the pandemic in Canada have returned to 56% in the United States.
Honourable member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's been over 700 days since the Prime Minister last tabled a budget for Canadians to see. That's unprecedented. The most important planning document for a federal government is a budget. Yet for 2 years, the government has operated with little transparency and even less accountability. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has botched its vaccine rollout, and he's failed to deliver a robust economic plan for the future. Where's the transparency, and when will the Prime Minister finally table a budget for Canadians to see?
Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, I thank the honourable member for the question, and I'd like to correct the record. He may be aware that there has been a global pandemic that took place during the past year that has interfered with the way that we ordinarily do things when it comes to our budgetary practices. If he's interested in transparency, I would remind him during the heart of the pandemic a little less than a year ago, when we were launching unprecedented strategies to get money to Canadians in need, we actually showed up repeatedly. In fact, every 2 weeks with a new report to the Finance Committee. I happen to know this because I was a witness on one occasion that actually presented that data to the committee. Every step of the way, we have advanced measures to help Canadians keep food on the table, a roof over their heads, and help.
The honourable member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you cannot blame the pandemic for not having an economic plan. The minister is asking Canadians for the right to borrow and spend billions of dollars more without a plan. Thousands of Canadians and small businesses are falling through the cracks because of the Prime Minister's failure to deliver a proper plan to reopen our economy. Canadians want their jobs back. They want their small businesses back. They want their lives back. They want their communities back. What's the Prime Minister's plan? And when will she, Minister, table a budget to show all Canadians what her plan for the future is?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have been transparent about our plan from the beginning. Our plan has been to respond in an unprecedented and ambitious way to ensure that Canadians had the support they need to see them through this pandemic so they can help contribute to the economic recovery when it is safe to do so. If he's curious about how our plan has panned out, I would point him to the nearly 9 million Canadians who benefited from CERB. I would point him to the 4.5 million Canadians who were kept on the payroll because of the wage subsidy. I would point him to the nearly 1 million businesses that have been able to keep the lights on because of emergency support we've gotten to them in their time of need. Our plan has been to support Canadians, to keep them breathing.
L'honorable député de Charlesbourg.
The honourable member for Charlesbourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, this government keeps saying the same thing over and over, and we'll probably be hearing them boast again about the number of doses we'll be receiving this week. But the amount we're going to receive is actually less than the number of people vaccinated every day in some countries. Canada is now 58th in terms of the total number of vaccines administered, and only 8% of the population, only 8% will be vaccinated by the end of March. Can the Prime Minister explain why Canada is the only G7 country to experience these kinds of delays? The Honourable Minister.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to reiterate that Canada was one of the first countries to begin inoculations, one of the first countries to sign with Pfizer and Moderna, and that in this week alone, we will be receiving well over 500,000 doses at 683,000. And this is the beginning of a continued steep ramp up with over 400,000 doses arriving per week prior to the end of March, and then millions and millions of doses arriving in Q2, Mr. Speaker. That's our plan. It's been our plan for months, and we will make sure that all Canadians who wish to have access to a vaccine prior to the end of September will indeed have such access. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Charlesbourg.
The honourable member for Charlesbourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we know that that's the plan, and the plan is that only 8% of Canadians will be vaccinated by the end of March. Now, the other issue is travellers. Travellers coming back to Canada are waiting up to 30 hours to try to reserve a hotel quarantine room. And they can't get through to anyone. It's a total mess. This Prime Minister dragged his feet on negotiating vaccine purchases, securing the borders, and now he is introducing measures for travellers that simply don't work. Can the Prime Minister tell us when he plans to fix this hotel problem?
Ministre.
Monsieur le Président.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have some of the most strict measures in the world. Flights to the south were suspended. People need to take tests when they arrive. There are quarantines in hotels. Mr. Speaker, the quarantines are being increasingly monitored. We're doing what we need to do to protect people's health. And I would ask the Conservatives to stop trying to scare Quebecers and Canadians. We are doing our job. The Honourable Member for Avignon-Amitié-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, we keep repeating, Mr. Speaker, that the best way to avoid issues when you get back from a trip is to simply not travel. But given that the government has implemented mandatory quarantines, it needs to be able to provide the services it promises. The delays on the government's hotline are unacceptable. The government tells people it might take 3 hours. That would be too long in itself, but some people have waited up to 25 hours. 25 hours, Mr. Speaker. Can this government confirm that it will immediately add more telephone operators? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said before in this House, it's important that now Canadians remember more than ever, now is not the time to travel internationally. We have added layers of protection on our border, including the need to be tested upon arrival and to quarantine until those results have arrived. We have added additional operators on the line, and we thank Canadians for their patience when they're booking their hotel rooms.